Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Co-op Wars Q&A discussion. Thank you so much for joining us and for tuning in virtually to this conversation. My name is Courtney Tarrant. I am the Community Engagement Coordinator here at Briar Patch Food Co-op, and I get the pleasure of introducing our panelists for today's talk. So our panelists for today includes Co-op War producer Eric S. We've got see, thank you. We've got Briar Patch General Manager Chris Marr. We've got Briar Patch Board Member Alan Weisberg.
Oh.
Hello, and Briar Patch member who has been a member, I believe, since the 70s, Lou Sitzer.
Hi, everybody.
Awesome. So thank you all so much for taking the time to be here and to be part of today's discussion. I'm really looking forward to what I believe will be a very fruitful conversation. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Eric, who's going to be leading our discussion today. And Eric, I'll let you go ahead and give a brief introduction of yourself and the film, and then we can turn it into the Q&A.
Great. Thanks, Courtney. It's been so wonderful to have this arranged for us and to share this film with your co-op. And thank you so much for your work putting this together. So just a little bit of introduction about the film and about why it exists. So back in 2006, I was working at North Country Co-op, which is the original natural foods co-op of the Twin Cities. And they were having their 35th anniversary. And I was in charge of putting that together as the marketing director. And so I started to learn a lot about the history of that co-op and learn about this thing called the Co-op Wars. And it really intrigued me for a bunch of reasons. One of which was just learning about how the co-ops got started and where they ended up was an amazing transformation. And I thought that people in the Twin Cities, where they have a lot of food co-ops, and they're pretty big now, we're pretty complacent about what an amazing resource they had. And a lot of people didn't know how small they started and how they were started by a bunch of kids, basically. And I thought that was a good story to share to help people appreciate what they have. And also it was interesting seeing how the co-ops have come out of a political movement and the social movement, and which they often do. And I thought people should know about that, but also should look at how the movement dynamics worked out in the Co-op Wars, and how that is a very familiar story we see in a lot of political and social movements of these kind of conflicts over ideology versus practicality, over which ideology people should have, over personality conflicts that get presented as political conflicts. And so I thought it was a really fascinating story for both people who are into co-ops and people who are into social change. And so that's where it came from. And so having this process of having events around the country and hearing about the histories of other co-ops has been really intriguing to me, to see the parallels and the differences. So with that said, I think the first question that I have is, how do you at Briar Patch, what's the resonances you see? What was your community in Nevada County like in 1975, 76? And how was it different from what you saw in the film?
Well, perhaps Alan and I can speak with some historical perspective. At the time, I was living in a Quaker community, John Woolman School, and out of which I think the Quakers really had a major influence in the birth of Briar Patch. George Bertram, who's no longer alive, from the Bay Area, brought the name and the concept of a co-op to the area. And one of the questions I have is I hope we don't lose the history of Briar Patch, because we still have numbers 1 and 2 membership still alive here. So if we move quickly, we can grab them. And I know that some of the Quaker values really transmitted to the Briar Patch, as well as a lot of the financial and sort of energetic support. So, rather than dominate, I'll just start with that and see what others can add.
Maybe I'll go. So I was not here in '76. So Lou is the only one among us, I think, who was. We came in around '87. And I think that so I didn't know all that much about the co-op, to be honest, except I liked shopping there. It's kind of funky. And we had a very small store at the time, which took a while before that changed. And it was not the first store either. So, and I think my own personal involvement had more to do with the Quakers. We spent as a young family, we had small kids, and my wife and I were very interested in having some kind of spiritual attachment. And what seemed most interesting to us at the time was the Quakers. And so we would go to Quaker meetings, and that's a lot of the people that Lou knows and knows well. There's such a strong tie with the Quakers. And so, but the whole food thing was not my thing at that time. It took a little while before I really got into getting involved with Briar Patch. And it took me for a while to get knowledgeable about food, for example. And I had some of the politics right, I think, at the time. So I was very open to it all, but it kind of evolved over time and then became a very big part of my life the last 20 years or so.
Yeah, in 1976, I was 1 year old living in New York, so don't have any direct observations to offer. But I've spent a lot of time talking with the founding Briar Patch members and folks who came shortly after as the co-op gathered steam. And I think what stands out for me, after watching Co-op Wars, which I loved, just give you an awesome compliment on the movie. It was fantastic, and I enjoyed it so much. But what stood out for me was that what you kind of heard from Lou and Alan, which is that this didn't feel like a primarily political movement, except in that it was trying to gather people together in community, which is, I think, not just a political, but a revolutionary act. And perhaps, especially in those days, and that's certainly true today. It's something that we're struggling with the level of polarization that exists in our community right now. But it, like they both said, it kind of had its roots in the Quaker meetings that were happening around town, and the desire for good food that was not readily available in Nevada County. So it was kind of an effort to bring people to the table together more than to align with any political ideology like you saw in the Co-op Wars film. I don't have much of a sense outside of the fact that it did, yes, bring folks who were activists together and who were involved in other things, but this was not the place that moved that forward.
Interesting. Learning about different co-ops around the country, it's interesting that a lot of them were focused on food, and some had a political aspect as well, or a spiritual aspect, but they all were social community hubs of a certain part of society. And for the Twin Cities, often it was the counterculture that came together around the anti-war movement. But there were other people who weren't involved in that. And so, Alan, you mentioned that having a funky feel, that feel to the store, is a social indicator. It's like it makes some people feel welcome and some people feel unwelcome sometimes. And so maybe you, Alan or Luke, could talk about back in the day, was everyone involved in the Quakers too, or they were the central hub, or was an aspect of the peace ethic of the Quakers what helped draw people to the store?
Well, the Quakers were and still are a very active social moving group. American Friends Service Committee, the Vietnam War, all of those issues were definitely active. And again, I was living in this residential community school. So we really had a chance to look at issues of social justice, not as polarizing, because things weren't quite as evolved as they are now. Number one, Eric, I really want to thank you for the movie and the perspective. I had no idea about ties to the Communist Party and the Black Panthers and all of that, which was not brewing here at all. But what was is what Chris pointed out, and that was a recognition of the importance of community. And that is ongoing. And that's one of the challenges I want to address later in our conversation, is how do we maintain and support that sense of community? And Chris has always been focused on that. I really appreciate that in his vision and the board's vision. And, you know, it's going to be a challenge as the co-op grows to keep that, or to figure out ways to encourage it.
It's interesting too, if I can chime in and reflect that while we were very much inspired by the cooperative activity that was happening in the Bay Area, our name actually comes from the Briar Patch Network, which was founded by Stuart Brand, who was a merry prankster, went around with Ken Kesey in the psychedelic bus, who started the Whole Earth catalog, to support the Back to the Land movement. And he and some of his, prankster cohorts came up with the concept of creating a network of businesses that worked towards collaboration and cooperation, as opposed to competition. And they didn't have to be co-ops in and of themselves, although some certainly were. It was just an idea that it would be a group of business owners, leaders, managers, what have you, who would get together and connect and share resources for mutual benefit. And that was happening in based in the South Peninsula. And we took the name out of that effort. And there's lots of information about the old Briar Patch Network online. It spread across the country. A co-op I was involved with in New Mexico was a part of the Briar Patch Network. Harvey Milk's Camera Shop was a part of the Briar Patch Network. And yet just a few miles from there was the People's Movement in San Francisco, which was very similar to what you saw in the co-op wars. It was very political, and it was kind of had an outbreak of violence similar to what you described in the movie happening in Minneapolis. So it's interesting to see that while those things were happening very close to each other, they didn't necessarily happen here as part of our background. It's kind of a curious reality.
Yeah, different worlds close together. Wow, interesting. So, so we talked a little bit about the very beginnings of the co-ops. How has Briar Patch evolved from those little tiny stores that were the beginning to where it is now? What were the stages along the way?
Well, yeah, the first one I remember was, and this preceded any kind of store, it was called the Grub Club. And it operated in a garage with bins of bulk foods. And then, then it became, it moved to actually storefronts and moved on from there. And I think Chris or Alan could address that more easily.
I think what's interesting, because again, I wasn't around those first 10 years or so, but there was this parallel movement going on, which Chris very appropriately points to. And that I was very engaged. I was Berkeley in the 60s. I was an undergraduate. Mario Savio, I was there, with the police car being taken away. There were sit-ins, the car dealers in San Francisco. This is all, and the whole HUAC thing was going on. And I don't think that this county was totally absent influence from that, because, Allen Ginsberg had a place here, Jerry Brown, not that radical Jerry Brown. There was a lot of interesting activity with artists going on here too. It was a pretty small community in many ways. So the co-op kind of floated along, not under the radar, but not very mainstream really, I think, until we built a decent sized store about 12 years. Is it about 12 years now, Chris? Ago, 10, 11, 12 years ago?
15.
Is it 15?
It's 15.
Okay, I should know that.
And to also mention that, and Chris and Alan will remember this, we had our own culture wars at about the time of the building of this new store 15 years ago. And Chris and Alan remember it well, because and at some point we should talk about that because it was the movement towards going corporate. which there was an element of the community that perceived it as selling out. And so it initiated our own culture war.
And it came into board politics at the time too. And that really was a horrendous time. I mean, it was a very, very dark time. And we were somewhat out of control right around the time that this new store was opening. And it was Lou and his wife at the time, well, long relationship. There was a group of about 5 or 6 of us that met for over 6 months to try to figure out how to turn this around. And we succeeded. And then we got Chris to come in. And I'd like to say that I don't think that we would be as socially, we wouldn't be anywhere near as socially conscious as I think we are without having Chris as our general manager. Chris has got the history, the interest. He's good at all the other stuff. But I think at the core, that's really important to him too. And that's made it really good for all the rest of us who carry those values.
Great. Yeah. I mean, I know the other co-ops too, in expansions and other changes, it brings up the question of like, what does co-op mean? There's a formal, organizational definition for co-op, but it's not necessarily what's in people's minds of what they think a co-op is. And so when things change, that's when it comes up as to what they think it means and is that being violated. So that's always the issue. So yes, a new store 15 years ago, and then you, Chris, maybe you could talk about how that has affected the co-op in being more available to more people through a bigger store.
Well, it really reflects the whole change that's happened in the organic and natural foods movement, and just health consciousness to try to pick up the widest umbrella that I can put it under, how that's changed over that same period of time. Certainly if you jump back to 1976 and you think about that initial movement to start the co-op, it was based out of a simple need for healthful, organic, natural, unadulterated whole foods that were not available in Nevada County, largely, very sparingly. And the folks who started it prior to it existing, would have to drive down to Sacramento or even as far as the Berkeley Co-op to get those types of foods. And that was happening all over. And now you jump forward to 2007 when we opened this store, or maybe 5 or 6 years before that, the natural foods industry had grown so much, but had not yet really hit that tipping point where you saw the conglomeration of small mom and pop companies producing foods get bought up by the big agricultural companies. And that's, of course, happened at an unbelievable rate since. And people have a difficulty with that, right? And it makes sense. You want to see more people have access, and you yourself want to have more access to more products and have more choice. Yet there's some concern and caution that comes with that access coming to market in a capitalist society. That's really incredibly challenging, and it's a conflict that we have to manage. And I think that when you see a small company get bought up and you have that emotional response to it, part of it is a powerlessness. Part of it is a feeling that this is happening. You're not sure that you agree with it or like it or want it. And when push comes to shove, you really can't do anything about it. The co-op offers a place where you can have voice. It offers a place where people who eat, which is everybody, can come together and have that dialogue and try to understand what the various pressures in the system are. And I would call out the tension between the purists, people who want the best and the greatest and the most pure, the most ethical, and the folks who want good food and are budget minded, and how those two things are a tension that exists within our store on a daily basis, and that we try to constantly manage. And sometimes simply the product doesn't exist. Either the pure product doesn't exist or the budget product doesn't exist. And that growth of access that's happening external to us is the thing that ends up providing it. So I think when you have a place like the co-op, the way to keep true to those initial roots is to be able to use the co-op as a vehicle to speak out and educate people about the issues that face them as consumers in a general sense and consumers of food in a specific sense, and then give them a voice to feed back into that system, and then try to find the middle path through it all that meets as many of the needs as possible.
Yeah, it's very well put. I mean, that conflict has been there from the very beginning. And it's really amazing. Doing this film has made me realize what an amazing opportunity the co-ops had basically for 30 years to have this natural foods market to themselves and not have much corporate involvement and be able to get themselves established as businesses. And now when the corporations are coming at you, we have some strength to fight that. So speaking of the future, where do you see the Briar Patch headed in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years in this new competitive environment, and also an environment where people, a lot of people are interested in natural foods?
My vision is to grow the co-op. My vision is to provide access for more people throughout the foothills region in California to the products and the food that we can offer them, and to the community that I just described. So this board and I have had an ongoing conversation about how that's best accomplished, and have made a commitment to moving it forward carefully and thoughtfully. They use a system where they've established ends policies, things that we want to make sure we continue to accomplish. And I described back to them as part of our conversation how we're going to measure whether or not we're accomplishing that, and thereby how we're going to craft the path towards accomplishing more. So I feel like that gives us the right push and pull to expand what we're offering to more people, to bring more people to the proverbial table, while making sure that we are having conversations like this one.
Yeah, I think that COVID has really played a very negative role. I think we were on another kind of role. We were doing really well, I think, in increasing community engagement and having activities at the store. We even have a little amphitheater that hasn't been used, to do outdoor stuff. It's still sitting there dormant. And I think the last 2 years, it's eroded some. It's just not much you can do about the reality of not being able to be together. And so that's what a co-op is all about. So I think that's part of our challenge through all this. And then we are opening a really first-rate, high-endish kind of store within our own budgetary abilities, I think, and that will be competitive, I think. And there'll be a lot of pressure to make that work financially. We're in good shape. We monitor that really carefully. But I think the magic in the last couple of years has been to really merge marketing and social purposes, which I couldn't imagine what that meant 10 years ago. And yet that has really happened in a way that is very impressive, I think. And I think it's made us one of the leaders in the country because we do that. It's so contrary to what people normally think of a co-op. Of marketing. Why do you have to market? What is that about? But that's how we get the community engaged. We're a big player in our community. So, and now we have another community we're moving into. It's close by, but it's a separate community. And being a big player around the right goals, I think, is really terrific. And I think that's hopefully in our future.
Yeah,
another concept that Chris has emphasized, and the board as well, is that of sustainability. More and more, we are becoming dependent on ourselves, on our own food sources, and the ability of Briar Patch to enlarge the footprint of local farmers, to engage the stewardship of land in the development of community is really important. It's really essential. And I can't emphasize enough the confluence of land, community engagement, food, social issues of justice and treating people properly. All of these things come into action, and the Briar Patch has been and will continue to be a hub of that conversation. That's my hope.
Fantastic.
I would add workers to that. I think that Lou spoke brilliantly, and I think that the nature of the workplace is certainly changing as a result of the pandemic. But even before that, there were incredible pressures on labor forces in various industries, no more so than in food. And one of the things that we bring to the table that's different from other natural foods retailers is a workplace ethic that has the same characteristics of what I described in the relationship with consumers.
Excellent.
That's very, very challenging. You know, we are not on our own when it comes to that. There are so many other forces that determine, you know, how that goes. So you got to really be conscious and work hard and make that a priority, which I think it has been for our board and for the co-op.
Well, good. Well, looks like we're about out of time, but I've been really encouraged hearing about what's going on at your co-op and this excellent merger of the practical and the and social change. I think that's the unique genius of what a co-op can be, and it sounds like you're on a really awesome path for that. So thank you so much for sponsoring the screening of the film and for having this conversation with me. And thanks for everyone who watched the film and is watching this. And I hope these conversations keep going and are fruitful for Briar Patch Co-op.
Great. Thank you for making the film.
Yeah, really.
Yeah. Thank you so
Well
much,
done.
Eric.
Well
Okay.
done. Thank you.
30 minutes goes by really quick, but thank you all so much. That was a wonderful conversation, lots of background and history information on the Briar Patch. So a big thank you all again to you, our panelists, for joining us, and everyone for tuning in virtually and for watching this screening. And thank you again, Eric, for sharing that film with us.
Thanks for having me.
Bye-bye.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Take
Good
care,
to see you,
everybody.
Lou.
See ya.